Welcome, everyone. I'm Leah Jameson. I'm the volunteer lead for this planning workshop on moving the needle on public understanding of engineering. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Purdue University, Dean Emerita of the College of Engineering, and I also hold a courtesy appointment in Purdue School of Engineering Education. And I am thrilled, as are my colleagues who've been a part of organizing this, that you are here. We're looking for as many perspectives and as much creative and inspired thinking as possible over the next few days. I'm going to start with two notes. First, as with all workshops hosted by the National Academy of Engineering, we have plans and policies in place to ensure that workshops run smoothly, keep on topic, and are welcoming environments for all attendees and speakers. The Academy's policy can be found at the link that's just been posted in the chat. It covers all forms of bullying and harassment, provides clear steps for reporting, and applies to every person in the event and in all portions of the event. And so we hope that you will join us in creating a truly welcoming, inclusive environment for all. Second, as was noted at the very beginning, all the sessions except for the breakout sessions will be recorded and posted to the NAE website. The basis for this planning workshop, sorry, my finger's not touching my iPad properly. The basis for the planning workshop is that there is little evidence of progress in increasing the public understanding or awareness or appreciation of engineering, even though our lives increasingly depend on engineering in both familiar and new ways. And we don't at all pretend that we're going to find a magic solution this week. We do hope, however, and believe that the rich discussions that happen when people from wide range of backgrounds and interests and sectors spanning industry, academia, across all levels, professional societies, policy, media, communication, come together around an area of shared interest, all bringing different perspectives and different experiences, that ideas worthy of future exploration will emerge. Ultimately, the goal is to spend some time this week delving into questions that will provide guidance to the NAE and to the broader engineering community and communities that care about, work with, or depend on engineering, insights and guidance on areas of focus, strategies, approaches, collaborations that can help shape future efforts to move the needle on the public understanding of engineering. I want to say that we're very grateful to the NAE Council Committee on Programs for their encouragement to convene this planning workshop. I'm grateful to the NAE staff, Beth Katie, Katrina Briggs, Guru Madhavan, as well as several staff members who are working behind the scenes this week. And we're grateful to the NAE leadership for their enthusiastic support. So it is now my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. John Anderson, President of the National Academy of Engineering. Prior to his service as NAE president, John was president of the Illinois Institute of Technology, which, by the way, is where I first touched a computer and learned to program. And he's a distinguished professor of chemical engineering. Among many, many recognitions, Dr. Anderson is a fellow. Obviously, he's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. That's a given, but also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. John, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Leah, to be here. I guess I should ask you what computer you first used. I'll tell you that I used the 1620 IBM. That was my first program. And that was a while back.
It was in 1966. and I don't remember the computer, but I learned ITRAN, which was IIT's version
Yeah,
of Fortran.
that's what it is. That's about the time I started. Bob Frowell's smiling there about which computer I use, but there's still a 1620 running in the computer museum. If you saved your cards, you could still run that program. I think I know a lot of people. There's a lot of familiar faces and names here, so I'm pleased to be. You're joining us for this workshop, and I really want to thank Leah for the great work she's done and the staff for putting this together. It's an important topic for me, and I'm spending a lot of my time on it now because I think it's very important. Everyone here appreciates the importance of engineering. And we know that many people benefit from what is created, designed, introduced into society by engineering. And with a better engineering literacy and understanding comes the ability to recruit talent into our profession from all segments of our society. People from different technical and social science backgrounds can enhance and improve the designs made and solutions pursued to create a better world. And public support of engineering could lead to more funding for engineering research and education. Finally, I would note that innovations and new technology are better understood and more likely to be accepted when the public understands the role of engineering in the process of innovation. So this is an important topic for us. It's ongoing. It will be ongoing for quite a while, but we hope to make some headway. As Leah noted, there's a real gap in understanding among the public of what engineers do and how we add value by creating important artifacts, processes, and systems for society, and how engineering, this is very important, I think, how engineering differs from science. We as engineers are well aware that engineering is responsible for creating economic growth, improving security, providing high standard of living. But unfortunately, many enclaves of the public at large do not have such good understanding of our profession. A prime example of the underappreciation of engineering is in the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Fauci wrote a wonderful editorial on the development of vaccines to fight the pandemic. This appeared in Science magazine about a year ago. But in that entire editorial, he never mentioned the word engineering. He never mentioned engineers, even though without engineering, you would have not had scale up. You would have not, in fact, the two founders of Moderna were both chemical engineers. So there's this underappreciation from diagnostics to protective equipment to the production of vaccines and therapeutics. Engineering has made great behind the scenes contributions to fighting the pandemic. The problem is the word behind the scenes, and we don't necessarily get credit for it. Whether it's increasing efficiency of energy utilization, better cybersecurity, or developing new ways to distribute food to those in need, engineers are key players. I'm well aware of the public awareness issues that many engineers are feeling. We hear the word engineering being replaced by technology or applied science too often, and the phrase science and technology omits the key word engineering that makes it all happen. We also know that our profession is not inclusive and welcoming to women and minorities as it should be, and I believe, as others do, that the invisibility of engineering is often one reason why, not the only reason, but one reason why we are underrepresented with those individuals. NAZE's mission is to advance the welfare and prosperity of the nation by first providing independent advice on matters involving engineering and technology, and secondly, by promoting a vibrant engineering profession and public appreciation of engineering. We should never lose sight of the second part of this, the public appreciation and vibrant engineering profession. Not only do we want the public to understand engineering to gain a better appreciation for our profession, but we also want to be better listeners and gain a better understanding of the current and ever-changing needs of society. So we have to listen also, it's a two-way street to society and understand society's needs. In the eyes of the public, and even with some practicing engineers and some of the faculty at engineering colleges, there's a misunderstanding between the relationship between engineering and science. Theodore von Karman, the first recipient of the Medal of Science, 1962 by the US, stated one important difference between science and engineering. I quote him, "Scientists study the world as it is. Engineers create the world that never has been." And let us keep in mind the two key words that define the engineering profession: creativity and innovation. Engineers create things that never existed, and these innovations affect the way we work, live, and play. An important step toward changing the conversation to elevate engineering in the eyes of the public takes place today with this workshop. In 2008, the NAE addressed our public image problem by holding a workshop called Changing the Conversation. The spring 2011 issue of the NAE's quarterly periodical, The Bridge, is titled Changing the Conversation About Engineering. In that issue, NAE President Charles Vest provides an excellent background that sets the stage for the discussion today. One statement by President Vest is especially relevant to this workshop, and I quote by Charles Vest: "No profession unleashes the spirit of innovation like engineering. From research to real-world applications, engineers constantly discover how to improve our lives by creating bold new solutions that connect science to life in unexpected, forward-thinking ways. Few professions turn so many ideas into realities. Few have such a direct and positive effect on people's everyday lives. We are counting on engineers and their imaginations to help us meet the needs of the 21st century." This is written in 2011. There's much value in these words relevant to this workshop. Somehow, changing the conversation lost momentum since 2011. We are here today to jumpstart it again. There's a great value in hearing from participants who come from a wide range of backgrounds, academia, business, and government, and who have diverse life experiences. This diversity is achieved here, and I commend Leah Jamison, her colleagues, and the NAE staff who planned this workshop and brought it to fruition. On behalf of the NAE, thank you. I am heartened that many of you have given your time to be here today, and we look forward to fruitful discussions. We must change the conversation. Thank you for your participation, and I'll turn the microphone back to Leah Jamison.
Thank you, John, for a wonderful start and perspective on why we're here and what we hope to achieve. Before we welcome our keynote speaker, I'm going to present some background to set the stage. John has covered some of this, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit. I'll start with a brief chronology of NAE activities in engaging the engineering community around the topics of public awareness and public understanding, spanning the past 2 decades. And I'm going to show some snapshots of surveys that both motivated and informed these efforts. And with luck, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So almost 25 years ago, a 1998 Harris survey on behalf of the American Association of Engineering Societies and a resulting NAE report on American perspectives on engineers and engineering led the NAE's Committee on Public Awareness of Engineering to survey and engage the broad engineering community on this question of public awareness. And I'll note that there was, in fact, an NAE Committee on Public Awareness of Engineering at that time. This led to the NAE report, Raising Public Awareness of Engineering, which recommended and outlined a coordinated campaign to improve public understanding of engineering. This quickly led to a 2003 survey, as well as new consultant-led research involving a wide range of audiences, including adults and teens, and results broken down by race, ethnicity, and gender. And this took form in the 2008 report that John referred to, the Changing the Conversation. Key recommendations from that report centered on fundamentally reframing messaging about engineering to focus not on the skills involved, but on the impact of engineering and engineers. The message, engineers make a world of difference, and the tagline, because dreams need doing, grew out of this effort, and they took shape in the follow-on messaging for engineering from research to action. And although I am focusing on this chronology of the NAE's reports and activities, it is critical to note that especially during this messaging research to action, that in fact, the communities was engaged widely. There were universities who ran with this, companies, professional societies, with connections to the messaging changes that had been identified in these two reports. The most recent Harris survey was in 2014, and the NAE report 2018 were driven by the goal of increasing the understanding of the educational and career pathways of engineers, but it included a dive into the question about public understanding. And one of its findings, for example, stated that lack of knowledge about the profession is a significant barrier for potential engineers from populations underrepresented in engineering. So what does the past data tell us? The plots here show the responses of adults surveyed in 2003 and in 2014 to the prompt, who first comes to mind regarding, and then a list of attributes, some of which are shown on the left here in this chart. They are in descending order of the responses related to engineering from the 2014 survey. The blue bars show engineering's share of the responses, orange shows science's share, and the gray shows the percent who responded that neither engineers nor scientists came to mind with respect to these topics. And with a parochially engineering hat on, I would say that we do okay in the first three. The economic growth, preserving national security would make a strong leader. Although we lost ground on national security and leadership between 2003 and 2014. But when we go further down into the chart, our mind share is going downhill from there. Slightly over 25% of the respondents associating engineering with improving the quality of life, well under 25% for protecting the environment and saving lives. And we lost ground on sensitive to societal concerns and inclusive of women and minorities between 2003 and 2014. And in the negative framing, in 2003, 31% agreed that engineers are responsible for creating things that are harmful to society. And by 2014, that increased to 49%. Polling of adults on their own assessment of whether they consider themselves informed or not about engineering and engineers, or scientists and science and scientists, shows a decline for both engineering and for science between 1998 and 2014, but also shows a pretty consistent gap, 13%, in the percent saying that they consider themselves informed about engineering compared to their assessment of whether or not they're informed about science. And finally, just a couple of snapshots summarizing some of the issues. Modest change in perceptions over 20 plus years, and prestige of engineering as a profession that has been described as so-so and static. For example, the table here shows the ranking in the Harris survey of prestige of professions. And engineer as a profession ranks number 10 with a score of 34 as having very great prestige. I'm going to note that this is a place where it's actually difficult to do longitudinal comparisons, especially beyond 2014 because of changes in marketing firms, survey methodologies, and reporting. But a recent public opinion survey of America's most respected occupations conducted by the Maru Group, engineering was ranked number 10, moving the needle. At the same time, in 2014 rankings, again, a Harris poll, 93% positive response as a profession you would encourage a child to pursue. And so there are some things to think about high on pursue the profession, not so much prestige. And finally, as John said, misattribution, the missing E, science and technology. Where is engineering in this? He presented referred to the quote from the article by Dr. Fauci. I will point to the, if I can stop everyone's pictures from covering it up. I will point to a quote that was noted by Don Winter, who's chair of the NAE Council, in his opening remarks at the last fall's NAE annual meeting, in which President Biden attributes the landing of Perseverance on Mars to the power of science and American ingenuity. And we're having computer problems suddenly. Okay. I am going to forgo the last slide and because my computer apparently doesn't want to show it to anyone at the moment. But what I am going to simply say in closing, this is why we're here. Should we try to move the needle? What can we learn from the people who do communicate with the public about engineering? What do we learn from past efforts? What is the case? Is there a case? And if so, what is it for a renewed effort? And if there's a case, why now? And what will it take to move the needle? And so with that, I am going to introduce our keynote speaker. Before I do that, I do want to, just a few housekeeping notes. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. We will open the floor to questions after the keynote talk. To ask a question, use the Zoom raise hand feature. Depending on your platform and version of software you're running, you should be able to find this under the reactions at the bottom of the screen or in the more ... menu at the top of the screen. You may also put questions in the chat as you listened to the talks and discussion. I'll ask that when we get to the Q&A, when recognized, please unmute yourself, turn off your video if that suits you. Please introduce yourself, name and affiliation, please, only, before asking your question. And throughout the workshop, we're going to encourage you to use the Zoom chat to share thoughts and links to relevant information. And with that, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Since August 2021, Dr. Susan Margulies has led the National Science Foundation Directorate of Engineering as Assistant Director for Engineering. Prior to that, she served as chair of the Wallace H. Coulter Department of Biomedical Engineering at Georgia Tech and Emory University. Susan is known for her groundbreaking work in pediatric traumatic brain engineering and injury, not engineering, and ventilator-induced lung injury. She is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and of the National Academy of Medicine. And Susan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Great. Wonderful. So it's my pleasure to be with you today and to kick off this workshop. It's actually perfect to come after John's comments and Leah's comments. I'd like to frame my remarks as the AM/FM solutions for expanding public awareness and understanding of engineering, turning up the volume and increasing the frequency. And that will be the theme of my comments today. I note that it's not just expanding the understanding of engineering. I really feel quite strongly that we also need to expand public awareness of engineering. So I'm going to use those two terms consistently today. So some of these quotes you've seen before, and so I'll go lightly through them. But I really felt it was important to talk about some definitions of engineering from famous and perhaps not so famous people. Starting from the left, Frances Arnold in her Nobel lecture in 2018, she's a chemical engineer. A wonderful feature of engineering by evolution is that solutions come first, and understanding of the solutions may or may not come later. And then by von Karman, a quote that you've already heard from John: scientists study the world as it is, engineers create the world that never has been. At the far right, and then I'll conclude with the green at the bottom, as scientific knowledge advances, engineering goes beyond that knowledge. The relationship between science and engineering, therefore, is complementary, synergistic, and essential. And that's a quote from both William Hammack and John Anderson in a recent issue of Issues. And the one that I love too is the one in the bottom in the center: creativity, problem solving, and helping the world. And that's from a 5th grade girl after watching a 5-minute NSF video about what engineering is. So why do we need to expand public awareness and understanding of engineering? And both John and Leah have touched on this. In the NSF, we talk about the missing millions, and the director is a proud advocate for really needing to address those missing millions and make faster progress on the diversity, that because we are now only bringing a fraction of the workforce to the problems of our society that we could be bringing. If this is a report that was just published in the past year. And if we thought about the science and engineering workforce as being all the people, those that represent women in the top row, show us that we only are employing just a little over half of the women of our population in the United States in our science and engineering workforce. And as you can see, only 1/3 of the Hispanic or Latinos, Black and African American, even fewer, and only less than half of the American Indian and Alaska Natives. This is for the science and engineering workforce. What about engineering? And here what you see in the bold dark blue line are the US population, age 18 and over, and you can see the message is the same. In our engineering degree awards, that's all of the degree awards combined, you can see that women are being underrepresented compared to their representation in the population, and that those that enter engineering occupations in purple is even a smaller fraction. It's the same as you can see for Hispanic and Latino and for Black and African Americans. So engineering is echoing science and engineering workforce as a whole. This is a lovely quote, a different one by William Wolf, former president of National Academy of Engineering, that engineering is profoundly creative. As in any creative profession, what comes out is a function of life experiences of the people who do it. Finally, sans diversity, we limit the set of life experiences that are applied, and as a result, we pay an opportunity cost, a cost of products not built, designs not considered, constraints not understood, and processes not invented. Every time we approach an engineering problem with a pale male design team, we may not find the best solution. We may not understand the design options or know how to evaluate the constraints. We may not even understand the full dimension of the problem. So how are increasing diversity and expanding public awareness and understanding of engineering linked? And what you saw from the previous two introductions, we've had a lot of reports over the last 20 years. Some of them Leah and John have mentioned. Others are even more recent. The SWE report you have not yet heard about, that's engineering messaging for tween girls. The more recent reports in the lower right about promising practices for addressing underrepresentation of women in science, engineering, and medicine. That's a NASEM study. And at the bottom one from just that last year, transforming trajectories for women of color in tech. I apologize for the sirens behind me. These report conclusions have been consistent. We need to enhance the awareness of what engineering is and who engineers are, why engineering is an important and rewarding profession, the societal impacts of engineering, that engineering welcomes people who look like me, the fact that engineers can look like me, all are essential to attracting and retaining engineers. What does NSF do to expand public awareness and understanding of engineering? Our merit review criterion number 2 for broader impacts has a long list of topics that are satisfy the broader impacts aspect. Improve STEM education, full participation of women and persons with disabilities, underrepresented minorities in science, engineering, and mathematics, you can see here. Enhance infrastructure, as you can see here, increase partnerships between academia, industry, and others. Increase public and scientific literacy and public engagement. We'd like to say engineering literacy too, right? With science and technology. And improved well-being of individuals in society, improved national security, and increased economic competitiveness. These are all aspects that also echo the importance of increasing our and the support that NSF has in supporting increased public understanding and awareness of engineering. In STEM education, we support STEM education's mission in all settings, not just formal curricular settings, but even in outreach settings and co-curricular settings. And the other aspect I'd like to highlight here is that we really want to emphasize in our STEM education mission, a well-informed citizenry. It's not just the students who we touch on and our workforce, but also general citizenry. And you can see technological literacy indicated here as well. NSF's communication streams and audiences are listed here, and you can see on the left the types of activities that we have, the types of audiences we reach out to. NSF's engagement with the public, I give just 3 examples. The USA Science and Engineering Festival every year, social media engagement, including Q&A types of engagement to help people interact with scientists and engineers, and as well, the recent Idea Machine Challenge competition, where the 4 grand prize winners, quite frankly, are all aspects where engineers play a prominent role. The NSF Engineering Directorate has funded the NAE in a project that began just last year, the Extraordinary Engineering Impacts on Society study, is identifying engineering impact with origins in NSF-funded activities. You can see the timeline at left. The public event will be this summer. Please look for it, as well as from their report onwards, the broad dissemination that NSF will play, and I hope the NAA too, with disseminating the results of the extraordinary impact that engineering has on our society. This is an example of a few awards that we have that are current awards. This is E4USA. This is at the University of Maryland, Engineering for Us All. This is about democratizing engineering. And on left, you can see what the grant has been funding. It provides a standardized curriculum for pre-college students who do not have the math and science background of college students at all. But for these high school students to learn and demonstrate engineering principles, skills and practices that use authentic design-based experience and afford students the opportunity to earn college credit. In their first award, they developed the curriculum and trained high school students. And our most recent award is about scaling it up. And by this past month, in March, there are 3,000 students, as you can see, from 50 high schools and 19 states, as well as DC and the US Virgin Islands. And I'm particularly proud of 52 of the 82 participants in the very first cohort went on to 2 or 4 year schools to engage in a STEM program. In the most recent cohort, it's very diverse, 42% underrepresented minorities and 43% are female and non-binary. Another one is teach engineering to democratize engineering, capture those resources to allow K through 12 instructors to make applied science, technology, and math come alive in their engineering design and design thinking. This is, again, so important. We actually take career award impacts and channel them into teach engineering. It's a wonderful, important, providing resources to our teachers. What have we learned so far about the essential features of a strategy to expand public awareness and understanding of engineering? I like to say that there are 5 I's that we take away about these successful strategies. We need to inform. Where has engineering made a difference? The example from Biden and Fauci are great ones. We need to tell the stories of engineering impact. We need to inspire. Why do we become engineers? Why are we proud to be engineers? We need to share our personal journey stories. I became an engineer before I walked across the stage and received a diploma. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching the world around me. We need to show our sweat. We need to show the work of engineering. It's not just a wonderful thing that happens when engineering has produced a societal impact. We need to show what it means to be an engineer. And we need to communicate the important humanistic values that inspire others to become engineers. The third I is to include. We need to feature engineers who are representative of our diverse nation. We need to speak with intention. Engineering does not equal science. The words that we use to communicate the achievements matter. We need to use the word engineering. And as a 5th I, we need to institutionalize and democratize engineering in our K-12 settings. Some might argue before kindergarten. We need to actually demonstrate the utilization and to teach about using engineering method, the design principles, iterative approaches to solutions. A recent New York Times article talked about productive failure and really calling learning an opportunity for understanding what productive failure is. Sequential solution-driven understanding is also something that is an engineering core that could be learned in K through 12 without math and science courses preceding. Unleashing creative solutions using math and science to understand how or why things work, and to foster, as the Keene Foundation would say, curiosity, creativity, and connection. So in conclusion, the AM solutions about turning up the volume and increasing the frequency, I believe that we need to engage our communities broadly and to share the responsibility for expanding public awareness and understanding of engineering. It means that we need to cooperate, we need to coordinate, and we need to collaborate. There is no one pathway to increasing the awareness and understanding. Some might ask, how will we measure success? This is my own personal measurement of success. I believe that at this point in time, and if I use Leah's data that she presented to bolster that impression, if I stopped a stranger on the street today, age 8 to 88, and asked them, what does a doctor do? They would give me an answer right away. They would give me an answer based on their personal experience with doctors, whether it was in person, whether it was on a TV show, whether they were reading a book, whatever their personal awareness is. It would not represent the full scope and richness of the field of medicine, but it would demonstrate the beginning of an awareness of what a doctor does. It's my hope that we will be able to approach, that I would be able to approach someone 8 to 88 and ask, what does an engineer do? and they would have an answer based on their awareness of what engineering is, or their interaction with an engineer or with engineering material. And that, similar to a physician question, they might not appreciate the richness of all the disciplines of engineering, but they would beginning to have that awareness and excitement about all that engineering can do and how it affects their lives. I think it's important for us to remember why we're having this conversation. This is a quote by Daryl Pines from just last month in our issues, in Science and Technology issues. Engineers of the future will need the ingenuity of Nikola Tesla, the scientific insight of Albert Einstein, the creativity of Maya Angelou, the determination of the Wright brothers, the leadership ability of Bill Gates, and the conscience of Eleanor Roosevelt, and the vision of Martin Luther King Jr. The nation's economic competitiveness, military strength, public health, and standard of living depend on these values, and growing the domestic engineering workforce is an essential step to making this future possible. Thank you, Daryl, so well put. So I want to conclude with that quote, and then I will stop sharing my screen, and I welcome our transition to our discussion.
Thank you, Susan. And what a truly remarkable and inspiring closing, because this question about how you measure is huge. And so we just need to go out and find those 8-year-olds and 88-year-olds, and we're going to get there. I'm going to remind the audience that you may raise your hand using the Zoom feature to ask a question. And when you're recognized, please unmute. And if you're comfortable doing it, start your video and ask your question. We also threw out questions posted in the chat. We will be monitoring that for questions that will then relay to Susan. And I'm going to start to give you all time to get organized. I'm going to start with a question about scaling, because one of the things, digging into past reports, past efforts, looking at media campaigns, there have been efforts to shine, I would say, a different light on engineering and to try to get at the nature of what engineering is. And yet, when we look at the numbers across a very large population, they don't really seem to move very much. What are your thoughts on how to scale effective approaches, effective messages, programs? You mentioned the programs at University of Maryland and at University of Colorado Boulder, scaling programs, and in particular scaling of programs that NSF has supported and helped get started.
Great question. So I put as one of the second to last slide about the importance of coordination, cooperation, and collaboration, because I think the other aspect of scale up is who owns it, okay? And I think what is important is to recognize that we all own it, whether we are professional societies, whether we're individual companies in industry or universities or consortiums of these. We all own it, and we all have to do more to be aware of what others are doing. So I do think that even at the most fundamental level, being aware of those successful strategies so that we can build on them, or simply, as we are engineers, repurpose them to my community. So even when I look at our career awardees, and our awardees for standard grants that has broadening participation. Broadening participation is an aspect of our ERCs, engineering research centers. It's an aspect of so many of our fundamental grants. But how do we connect across those broadening participation initiatives? how can we have a menu of, here are some great ones you might consider. We don't want to stop you from creating your own initiative that's near and dear to your heart, but having a mandate about communicating them, warehousing them so that they're broadly accessible, and so that we might actually have others contact us about the thing that I tried in my university or in my discipline that could really be used in other settings. So I think scaling up is a grassroots effort, but I think that we can create structures that allow us to connect and become aware of what's being tried.
Thank you. I see Maxine Savitz has her hand up. Maxine?
Yeah, thank you, Leah, and thank you, Susan. Bob Sherrill, who I notice is also on the call, and Beth, who is helping with this organization, and I are all involved in a NAE study sponsored by DoD of advanced manufacturing into the undergraduate engineering education programs, particularly concerned for the defense industrial base. Some of the things we're learning is how important the pipeline, particularly through people from high schools. And on your, so I was very interested in your course that you have developed with the University of Maryland, Engineering for Us. Is manufacturing part of that? So much we talk, and you know, when you give the example of Fauci, or John did of with the vaccination, it was the manufacturing production, it's the discovery, as opposed design is important, innovation, but are you doing anything incorporating in your programs manufacturing engineering, particularly something like that?
So I hesitate to answer off the top of my head, but I think you ask a great question, and I will go back and I will look to see and how we're basically bringing an understanding of the engineering role in manufacturing and the need actually to continue pushing forward advanced manufacturing, and that interrelationship between engineering and science in pushing manufacturing forward to be able to really scale and to go from the lab to our hands as citizenships. It takes manufacturing. And so I thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to look into that, what we're doing and what more we could be doing. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be interested in your what you find.
I would love for you to reach out to make sure that we coordinate with the work that you're doing, because I feel that NSF would benefit from the result from your report. I would love for you, when you've completed your report, to share that with NSF.
Okay, and Beth will make sure we do that.
Thank you.
Next up, Mike McMeekin.
Thank you. My name is Mike McMeekin. I'm the president of Engineering Change Lab USA, a new nonprofit that's focused on the future of engineering. Susan, 2 questions. What do you think is the awareness among the community of practicing engineers of this sort of really poor performance in public understanding of engineering? And do you think there's the right sense of urgency among the community of practicing engineers on why we need to improve this?
Well, anyone who's in a hiring role will basically have that awareness and sympathy in terms of the urgency that you talk about. I do believe that we do a pretty good job in our undergraduate training of helping engineers understand the ethical considerations of what we do as engineers. I think we probably don't emphasize the important role that every one of us play in increasing public understanding and awareness of what engineering is and what engineers do. I think there's work there that we could begin early on for engineers to not only have outreach with science and engineering fairs in high schools and junior high and middle schools, as well as elementary schools. We could really emphasize the importance of that role as being integral to the fabric of being an engineer. I think that there's room for that. The urgency of increasing the public understanding, I do not believe is well understood. And I think that in my presentation, as well as Leah's and John's, was the interaction between engaging all of the workforce that should be part of improving our society and understanding the role that engineers play in that and bringing them and training them as engineers, that coordination between diversity, retention, inclusion, belonging, this actually has to be part of our message with increasing our public awareness and understanding of what engineering is.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the chat for a minute. You mentioned, for example, fairs as ways that there is a dissemination and an enthusiasm building aspect of that. And so I'm just going to note a comment by Daryl West, who is tech support this morning. So thank you, Daryl, for making us all be here. That noting that National Engineering Week and that the material that's produced by that a condensed version would be very useful and could play a role in national outreach to extend the reach of that, especially for K-12. Daryl was involved as an ex-IBMer in organizing it and managed to reach over 10,000 students in the New York area. And also the NSF video as a great example, and to think about ways to expand that and distribute that. Because if we could reach an entire country of fifth graders, that would speak well for the future. I'm going to do one slight correction. The message about fairs and the videos that Daryl sent was actually forwarded on behalf of Dariji Aganafar. And so thank you for that and for steering me in the right direction. Next up, Kathy Hosick.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hosick, and I am a Purdue electrical and computer engineer. In fact, a former student of Leah Jameson's and a retired CIO. And I think, Susan, as you said, words definitely do matter. And the interesting thing is that in all of the quotes, I saw myself. Even though they didn't have the word engineering in them, I clearly saw myself in each one of those, and I would have identified as, yes, President Biden is speaking about what I'm doing or what I have done in my past and what I continue to do actually as a retired person. So, I think that one of the challenges that we have is that society has, to a great extent, taken the word technology to mean what we do as engineers. And I know that can send shudders down everybody's back because, oh, technology is that 2-year degree and it's this and that's the other thing. The reality is that as I look at both the quotes that were shared today as well, what is talked about in industry, I think the reality is that is what's happened. And so somehow or another, we need to equate those two words and not shudder every time somebody uses technology instead of engineer in terms of words. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is, one of my retirement projects is I'm on a nonprofit board that works with high school students in the city of Chicago, in the poorest areas of the city of Chicago. And one of the things I learned through that is you have to meet these kids where they are, not where we wish they were. And as we work with these high school students, they barely understand the concept of a scientist, let alone the concept of an engineer. And these are seniors in high school. So part of this is getting into the schools and early on and helping them experience this. But more importantly, as they get closer to graduation and whatever the next few years of their life is going to be post high school, we need to let them walk in the shoes of engineers. If we want to get more minorities in, they actually have to experience what it is for real, not in the classroom. In fact, we've heard very clearly from some of our teachers that although you can teach design thinking in school, until you actually see it applied to a business problem or to an environmental problem or whatever, until they have that opportunity to walk in the shoes of someone who does that for a living, it means nothing to them. It truly means nothing to them. So I think that yes, we have to be in the schools, but more importantly, we have to give them access to what happens in the real world as an engineer.
Thank you. I completely agree. In our new broadening participation in engineering solicitation, we have a deadline in November for inclusive mentoring hubs. And these go from K through 12 all the way through a very senior faculty member and into industry and societies. What we really feel is important is creating an inclusive mentoring environment, and it can be discipline specific. It can be across all of engineering. It doesn't have to stay on campus. But it recognizes what you had highlighted, Kathy, about the importance of creating a mentoring environment. And that can be peer mentoring. It doesn't have to be someone who's further along the path, or I'm in college now and I want to talk to somebody who's in industry or in a professional setting, beyond college. I want to mention a couple of things that your comment raised in me, and that is the problem-driven learning model is incredibly powerful. I see something around me. I'm curious about why. Unleashing creativity and then bringing an engineering approach to what might you learn by trying is such an important vehicle that is not limited to college or the world beyond, because that is one of the ways that we operate. And to really demystify how engineering can provide an easy on-ramp into looking at the world that you live in. I think it's so important. You need to connect with the world where someone is and bring engineering to where they are, not bring them to engineering. I think it's very important.
Okay, thank you. Roger McCarthy.
Roger McCarthy. I'm the treasurer of the National Academy of Engineering, with no financial background whatsoever. But my question and comment, which is probably a combination of both, deals with the issue of scale, which, I really appreciated those metrics that Leah presented from 2003 to 2014. And while she tried to put the best picture on it, related to engineering deteriorated in that period of time. Now, that would be one thing. Except let's look at the background against which that deteriorated. We've had, first of all, Dean came in his first competition for robotics, which we've gone through this whole discussion so far, which has probably done more to interest more kids in science and technology than everybody on this phone call put together. So I'm looking at his website and his logo right now for the first competition. And you know what it says? For inspiration and recognition of science and technology. The word engineering doesn't even appear in the label of the first engineering, and Dean came in as one of ours. So in some sense, we have to get out of this echo chamber and start talking to the people who are really making a dent at scale. But let's set aside Dean Kamen, who's done an incredible job with tens of thousands of kids. When I think back I'm really old, and maybe people don't become engineers now for the reasons that I became an engineer. But I didn't become an engineer because I wanted to do great things for society. I didn't become an engineer because I thought it was a way to learn about problem solving or anything else. I became an engineer because I wanted things in my environment to change. And I had the good fortune to have an eccentric grandfather who filled a barn full of machine tools and then died young. And there they sat for 20 years, and I was able to assemble a shop. But nobody could do that nowadays. But incredibly, out of the blue comes this new technology, additive manufacturing. And once again, we have an opportunity to introduce kids to science, engineering, creativity at scale. And when do you see the word engineering get associated with additive manufacturing? It's like the Dean Kamen thing again. it gets associated with technology, and we're missing the huge Trojan horse of scale to introduce kids to engineering, because now every kid can manufacture in their home. That was never the case before, never the case, and they can do that now. And that's setting aside the ease at which we can do microscopy now. I mean, I have 100 microscopes, and that was miserable technology until digital electronic microscopes come along. Now the lowliest kid has better microscopy capabilities than I had in college. So against this background of all these incredible manufacturing scientific tools that you can have in every home, we are not ponying up on these Trojan horses that could bring in, that are bringing engineering into every home, and we're just not putting the right label on it. So reinforcing your point that words do matter, words really matter, labels really matter, and we don't have to go very far to get, first on board to say maybe we should do recognition of science and engineering, or maybe we should get additive manufacturing associated with engineering. We just have to think back of why we became engineers and what these current technologies provide as a vehicle to illustrate real time, firsthand, to kids with money they're already spending what's going on.
So that's a perfect comment, Roger, to lead off, of course, 3 days of discussion about how we have tools now that we might not have had previously. I'm going to give a shout out to John Anderson, who wrote the director of the NSF, and said in this news piece that you published, you failed to actually use the word engineering when the people who produced that great outcome were actually engineers. And kudos to John. The NSF also is paying attention to using the word.
Thank you. We are coming up, but we're going to take a few more questions. What I'm going to ask though for the next 4 people, and that's Telly, Barrett, Carl, and Diane. Please be brief in the questions, not statements, and then we will move on to the next stage. So Telly.
Hi, good to see you, Leah. Nice to meet you, Susan. I'm Telly Whitney. I'm former CEO of the Anita Borg Institute. And like several of the past people, I'm really looking at how words really matter. And one of the big ones that I haven't heard you mention is the engineering versus computing. I'm a computer science by background, and I do consider myself an engineer, but many of my colleagues do not. That work in the computing field. And I've watched these duplicate efforts, especially with K through 12, because the computing professionals they've made a lot of money, so they're investing in computing, like code.org is probably the easiest one to think about. And I'd love for you to comment about how to combine these efforts that different groups, SWE was a group that was fairly similar to the group that I led, and we still remain fairly different, and people had strong opinions about visiting them. So how do you, just any comments you have about this really important problem? Nice to meet you, Susan.
Very good to meet you. So this is near and dear to my heart. I think that we may be in the weeds about the differences between computing and engineering, and the general public, still needs to understand. I hope that we get to the point where people understand the difference between computing and engineering, and the educational opportunities. I would say when first-year students are making their selection, am I in a college of computing or am I in a college of engineering? And am I in how does my pathway forward, how is it affected by the choices that I'm making early on? We want to make sure that everyone along our pathway, from the very youngest age to even those who are changing careers many years after graduation, are making informed decisions. So I think we should be coordinating. We should actually be cooperating together and having shared events to enrich the discussion about engineering, computing, the differences, the overlap, so that people can understand the impact that we're having on society today. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Barrett Caldwell.
Thank you, Leah. I'm Barrett Caldwell. I'm a professor of industrial engineering at Purdue and director of the NASA Indiana Space Grant Consortium. And a lot of the things that I'm hearing here about public communication for engineering, we've also talked about in the NASA STEM engagement realm. In response to Lee, I will turn this into a question. But I think following up on what Susan just said, we're in the weeds about almost everything that I've heard people talk about. So advanced manufacturing, computing, blah, blah. All of these things are after you already know. And what I heard the comment about the lowliest K-12 student has access. No, the lowliest K-12 student does not have access. The lowliest K-12 students are still working with 50-year-old wrong textbooks. The understanding of where's going to be an eclipse in 2 years, we can't move that. There's the Weather Channel. They rely on NASA satellite images. So one of the questions that I need to ask is, how can we in this community learn to forget how much we already know in order to communicate more effectively with people who have never gotten to know what we already know, so that we don't sound like arrogant poopy heads when we start talking to them?
We need to listen. We need to be where they are and listen to the conversations. We need to stimulate those questions and the curiosity to learn more. So that I agree with you, Barrett. It's such an important part to understand where they are. And when I said my measure, my personal metric of progress will be to ask someone 8 to 88, what does an engineer do, or what is an engineer? That is getting at something so fundamental, but also by listening, you understand why, where did that information come from? What has influenced that? And to be able to understand how best reach populations of people, because it's not bringing them to the definition. It's actually helping enrich their understanding where they are, that engineering is around them. And so I think coming in to classrooms, sitting down in circle time, if it's that young, right? And then talking at their level, with their level, and listening. Listening is the beginning. And speaking at that level is the beginning.
Carl Smith.
Thanks, Leah, and thank you very much, Susan. Carl Smith, engineering education, Purdue, formerly a metallurgist. Well, still a metallurgist, I guess. Tom Fisher argues in a forthcoming book, Space Structures and Design in a Post-Pandemic World, that pandemics accelerate us into the future and magnify trends, reveal inequities and dysfunction in existing systems, bring renewed attention to public and personal health, and create opportunities for those who can grasp the change. He also notes that past pandemics have had a pretty big influence on higher education. What do you see as potential leverage points, affordances, et cetera, from this, I guess, current pandemic, especially for broadening participation and making engineering a more welcoming and inclusive profession?
So from the thank you, great question. From the very first days of the pandemic, when as a faculty member, we were all struggling to, oh my gosh, we have a hands-on experience and now the students are all home. How do we bring it to them? And the shared experiences across campuses about how are you doing this? How are you doing this? And I don't just mean across a campus, one single campus, but from campus to campus to campus, taught us how innovation and bringing materials in non-traditional ways to make learning happen it broke our molds. And I see this as a pivot point. We have demonstrated we can do it. Keep the revolution going.
Thank you. And finally, Diane Chong.
Thank you very much, Leah. Good to see you again. I'm Diane Chong. I'm a retired vice president in engineering, technology, and operations at Boeing. The immediate past president of ABET and the current president of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. I love the ideas of taking the engineering to the students, to the classrooms. What are we doing in terms of reaching beyond the classroom to the families and the communities who are highly influential and they may not understand engineering? The kids will catch on, but if their families don't, what are we doing about that?
I think that's an excellent point, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because parents and families are so important to helping students feel supported in the choices that they're making and in the career paths that they are making. We see the same thing when someone is a first generation student and taking a path that is hard, and their own family needs to be such an important part of their support structure to understand their journey. So that communication is not just about attracting students to engineering. It is also communication with the families and educating them about retaining those students and then having them be part of the engineering workforce of the future, whatever path they take. So thank you for bringing that up. And I want to make sure that this workshop includes the increasing understanding for families as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. This has been wonderful.
There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad that this workshop is happening. Very timely.
And certainly thank all of you for questions and for a lot of different perspectives and a very active chat conversation going on across it. So thank you all. It is time for a very quick Zoom poll. There we go. So this is intended to be very fast. And so register your answer, and it's being shown real time as we go.
Only to the host, Leah. We can't see it.
Oh, you can't see it? Okay, well, cool. I can see it. But it also means I can see when the responses start slowing down. Okay, we're at 84% participation. We're going to call that good. So does this mean I get to end the poll? Okay. And so there is the summary with everything concentrated in the middle, but with the center of mass, in fact, in the middle, it's staying the same, and about equal distributions for somewhat improved and somewhat decreased. So we have our work cut out for us. I'm now going to turn it over to David May, who is moderator for the opening panel session.
And thank you, Leah, and thank you, everyone. I'm very excited actually to be with this group today and talking about this, because many aspects of this issue are things that I've dealt with over the course of my career. So it's wonderful to see it in a live discussion with the professionals responsible for it. We're going to have a panel today on the first session is titled Campaigns and Messaging for the General Public. We have 4 distinguished and practiced experts to talk with us about it today. We're going to give each of them about 7 minutes to talk about what they've been doing, and then we'll do a Q&A session following as well. So please keep your notes, keep your questions live, and use the chat as well. Our first speaker is going to be, yes, please, Leah.
If I may, I'm just going to say that David is the Chief Communications Officer for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine.
Perhaps I should have done that, but
that's okay.
Nonetheless, Here I am. We're going to talk first with Bill. Bill Hammack is the William H. and Janet G. Lycan Professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His work focuses on explaining engineering and technology to the general public. For a decade, he broadcast commentaries on public radio, and over the last decade, has developed a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers and over 70 million views. His work has been recognized with awards from a diverse group of engineering and science societies, including the Hoover Medal, awarded by a collection of engineering societies, and he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. So Bill, why don't you pick up?
Okay, excellent. I'll keep the chat open, and so if you can't hear me or see something, I will catch that. So I'm going to echo what other people said, that the most basic task for public understanding of engineering is still to define engineering, or to put it more simply, to show what an engineer does. My hope is that here I can talk a little bit about what it is that we need to communicate about engineering and how the way the public thinks about it causes some problems, 4 distinct problems. And, as we've heard, the public typically has an applied science model in their head. They have the idea that first a scientist thoroughly understands a phenomenon, then engineers do some uninteresting development until a product appears. And yet, of course, we all know this, that for centuries, engineering has preceded fundamental scientific understanding. In fact, in the absence of complete information, engineers have created buildings, devices, and systems, and that's revolutionized the world. And, the basic reason is that the public, and thus engineers, can't wait for science. We need bridges, we need mobile phones, or more importantly, we need medicine, and vaccines, and we need that today. So the notion of fundamental scientific understanding is embedded in that applied science viewpoint is completely backwards, because to lack complete information, yet design something useful, signals that an engineer is at work. And to solve problems with incomplete information is the reason that the engineering method exists. So in these very short remarks today, I'm just going to outline very briefly the core of the engineering method, and then highlight, as I mentioned, 4 ways that applied mindset, science mindset kind of distorts public understanding. And so let me first turn to the practice of engineers. And maybe most of you listening will first think of engineering as the mastery of some kind of, arcane realms of knowledge. I don't know, sophisticated calculus, powerful computing science. And of course, it's all implemented by a dispassionate, almost mechanical person. But really, the power of engineers lies in their method. And it's a method that was used long before any kind of sophisticated mathematics and computers. And the products of engineers arise from a method, we might call it a mindset, that's rarely articulated, that's almost invisible, and yet it's in many ways universal across cultures and throughout history. I mean, I'd argue no society has survived without some form of the engineering method. And we can see the essence of engineering by looking at the defining activity of engineering, and that's design. Engineers design a process, they design a device or a system, to be tangible, a microchip. I'm a chemical engineer, so they design a chemical plant or an internet search engine. And as I've written elsewhere, to do this, engineers use rules of thumb, more properly called heuristics. And these rules of thumbs have a kind of counterintuitive character for a tool that's built civilizations. They don't guarantee a correct answer, and their correctness depends on context, because an engineer's heuristic method isn't really intended to capture any fundamental truths about nature, but it's just a tool, and it's a tool that reduces the time for solving a problem. And to many, this shocks a bit because it suggests design built on ignorance, and it contradicts the commonplace belief that engineers need science to finish its job before they can do their job. And I don't really want to use the balance of my time to justify this description of the method. I'll put in the chat, or have put here, I'll put it right now in the chat, links to a short article on the subject that I wrote with John Anderson, and information on a forthcoming book that treats the idea at length. But I do want to briefly explain the relationship between engineering and science. Science provides better rules of thumb, specifically scientific data and theories that guide the initial choices in a design, that call out possible solutions from a vast number of possibilities. So we need to think of science as part of the machinery that fuels modern engineering. To assume engineering is mere applied science really is just to confuse the machinery of the method with the method itself. And to my way of thinking, it's the fuzziest kind of thinking because it conflates the tool with the method. It's like saying carpentry is applied hammering, or composing music is applied pitch, or writing a book, is applied lettering. But now, maybe a little more unique here, let me turn to why this applied science view is harmful to public understanding of engineering. And because my time's short, I'll highlight just one manifestation of that view, and I'll look at 4 key ways it distorts understanding. The model of applied science, or crudely put, that science first, then something happens, suggests there's a single seminal event, usually a scientific breakthrough, of course. And because of this, we often talk of the great sole inventor of some household object, instead of describing the very rich engineering needed to perfect and place an object in our homes. And so the first problem is that these simple stories hide the creativity of engineers. And we've heard that a bit here. Mention light bulb, and the mind flashes to Thomas Edison, and then all inquiry stops. And what's hidden is the, elegant, I would argue subtle, I'd argue sublime ingenuity of engineers as they respond to constraints that arise from mass manufacturing, as they evolve ways to rapidly and reliably mass produce a light bulb. And hiding that makes the field so exciting and creative. It hides that. And that dissuades the best and brightest really from pursuing an engineering career. And it really robs us of a next generation of innovators. We need engineers to, confront global challenges, mitigation of climate change, control of pandemics, avoidance of famine, and more importantly, yet unseen needs. Now, second, not only does this way to think hide the engineering method, but it also hides people. To study the evolution of a product lifts from the background underappreciated people, often underrepresented people, and highlights that engineering creativity exists in everyone. For example, few have heard of Lewis Latimer, yet his work improved the reliability of light bulbs for a really critical 10-year stretch as electric lighting was adopted by consumers. And so to see only a genius as the face of engineering dissuades the next generation from seeing engineering as a creative endeavor, as a profession open to all, and it reduces the number of minds working to solve the problems that our world faces. Now, third, this applied science model suggests that engineering has the objectivity of science. I should be more careful. I should say the perceived objectivity of science, though I'll leave that to philosophers to debate. And it so obscures that an engineering solution isn't absolute, but is relative to conditions, and thus bias can be introduced. It hides that a successful engineering design reflects all the forces in society, not just technical restrictions, but cultural, political, and social as well. And that means that engineering designs reflect bias, and bias that we must always seek to remove. And fourth, and finally here, thinking of an invention as springing from a sole inventor leads to the fallacy. It's often, we see it in headlines, that one climactic breakthrough covers all problems, when every invention is only one particular culmination of countless breakthroughs, both the sensational ones and the simply arduous over countless years. And this creates unreasonable expectations. This reduction of engineering to a single event often causes us to talk about science and technology. Technology is the child of science. And we've heard a lot about technology so far, which I actually agree with. But that use of the word creates the impression of technology as an unstoppable force, something beyond the control of the public. And because of this, it causes the public, and I'm going to use here the words of Thomas Hughes, an engineer turned historian, it causes the public not to exercise the civic responsibility of controlling these forces that in turn shape our lives so intimately, deeply, and lastingly. And the first steps to control these forces is to replace simple mythical images of engineering with a rich, nuanced understanding of how engineers create with the engineering method. And that means that we must show Engineers in Action. And I say thanks for listening, and I will do my best in the question session. As Leah and others know, I'm also simultaneously teaching first grade right now because my son's first grade class is remote currently because of COVID. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bill. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Yvette Pearson. She's Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Texas at Dallas. She's a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Dr. Pearson's recognized globally for over 25 years in higher education, particularly for her work to advance sustainability, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Her efforts have led to over $30 million in funding for initiatives to support DEI and STEM and changes to policies and practices of global engineering organizations. Among her honors and awards are ABET's Claire L. F. Feldbinger Award for Diversity and Inclusion, ASCE's Professional Practice Ethics and Leadership Award, University of Texas Regents Outstanding Teaching Award, the Society for Women Engineers Distinguished Engineering Educator Award, and ASCE's President's Medal. Yvette is a registered professional engineer, commissioner on ABET's Engineering Accreditation Commission, and host of Engineering Change podcast, which has audiences in over 70 countries and on 6 continents. Yvette?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. I think that the talks we've heard so far are really a perfect segue, especially hearing Susan speak about the intersections of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and I'll add justice, and the public understanding of engineering. And that will be the focus of my comments today, to kind of bring those things together. Back several years ago, I did an outreach activity with middle school girls, and these happen to be middle school girls who were from traditionally marginalized racial and ethnic identities. And before I started my activity with them, I put the Post-it pads on the boards, and I had axes drawn on them where I labeled the extremes of the X and Y axes with things like team players, not team players, good communicators, not good communicators, help society, do not help society. And I asked the girls I gave them a set of colored dots, and I asked them to study all of the charts and to go and put those colored dots in the quadrants that they thought best represented engineers. And by and large, those dots fell in the quadrants that said they didn't see engineers as good team players, they didn't see engineers as good communicators, and they didn't see engineers as people who help society. And that really pushed me all those years ago to think about, we really, really need to change our image. We've said forever that engineers are problem solvers, but what we often leave off is another word, I think, that is very important to that, and that is people. Engineers solve problems for people, and if we're doing it well, we solve problems with people. And to get those rich outcomes that serve all of society well, we do have to have all of those rich perspectives added in. And so what that led to, and again, this was years ago, is I just did a Google search for engineers, and I did another Google search for engineering. And when I searched for engineers, by and large, at that time, I saw a bunch of people who appeared to be white men in hard hats. And my background is civil engineering, so I have nothing against hard hats. I've got a cute pink one myself, but I also recognize that hard hats shouldn't be the thing that says engineering. It doesn't represent all of engineering. And also all engineers. And when we looked at engineering, most of the images were just completely inanimate objects. So you might see a gear, you might see some squiggly lines, or you might see some binary code that represented some type of computing language or something of that nature, but you never saw the human side of engineering. Now, fast forward a couple of years ago, I updated that search and I looked, and I did see a bit more diversity in the appearances of the engineers still the hard hats though. But in engineering, I still saw the inanimate objects. And so there's just this disconnect between engineering and society that I believe is very limiting. And again, going back to Susan's talk, I think it's very limiting in who we are able to attract to engineering, because young people want to know that what they're going to do in their lives makes a difference to society. And so when we don't have that image in front of people's minds, we're missing that opportunity. It also impacts how it limits the impacts we're able to have in our work. That comes from the lack of representation. So we can't solve problems for a heterogeneous society with homogeneous problem solvers. So we have to have the representation, but beyond that, we also have to have the equitable and inclusive engagement. And then we also have to work with communities through lack of trust that's been built up over years and years of just doing things wrong with the communities we serve. And so that led to me developing this call to action to redefine engineering, re-image who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering, de-silo our approaches to academic programs and problem solving, and fine-tune culture and climate so that everyone can succeed. And that's been the focus of my work for quite some time. It's the foundation of my podcast, Engineering Change. And it really focuses on having this intentional, iterative, user-centered process to addressing change, as opposed to the ad hoc, siloed efforts we're accustomed to. So real quickly, I'll walk through a couple of examples and happy to answer questions about more. So re-image who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering. Starting with who we see as engineers, one of our NSF-funded projects focuses on mathematics accessibility. We started the project with my colleagues at Auburn University, Montgomery, and Auburn University, and Rice is also a partner, which was my prior institution before joining UTD. But we're looking at how we make mathematics more accessible to students who are blind or have low vision. And the method that we're working with, which is called process-driven math, is showing great promise for students who have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and other invisible disabilities. And oftentimes when we start talking about equity and inclusion in this space, people with disabilities are completely left out of the conversation. So we are trying to make sure that mathematics and education more broadly in engineering is accessible to all students. Another thing about re-imaging who we see as engineers is really the need to change the mindset, both in the public and amongst the engineering community. So there's a lot of deficit framing around people from traditionally marginalized identities that comes from people in the engineering community and the engineering academy. And so we need to really reframe that to have more of an asset-based framing, and then also having people, especially engineers and engineering faculty, see engineers from traditionally marginalized identities as normal and not the exception to the rule. And so, and also a part of that mindset shift is recognizing that when we're doing these efforts in the context of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's not about excluding anyone. And also it's integral to and not counter to excellence. And I think that's a point that's very much missed in a lot of what we do. One of our signature programs in terms of outreach for that at UT Dallas is our young women in science and engineering investigators. We call it Young Wise. And this is where we bring in young women in high school to engage throughout the year with engineering faculty and students on science and engineering research and problem solving. So re-imaging what we see as engineering, part of that goes to what we see as our responsibilities as engineers. And again, going to the fact that engineers are problem solvers. If we're solving problems for people, if we're doing it well, we're solving problems with people. And so a lot of my work with ASCE has been focused on that, including making sure principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are embedded throughout ASCE's Code of Ethics, recognizing our professional responsibility to work with communities to honor and respect the differences and solve problems in an equitable way. And then we also revised ASCE Policy Statement 417 to further communicate that responsibility. In terms of de-siloing our approach to academic programs and research and problem solving, this really ties in well with the push from the National Research Council and NSF toward convergence. So through one of our NSF funded projects that includes Rice, Texas Southern University, Prairie View A&M University, and Jackson State University, along with the Army Corps of Engineers, we're studying how multidisciplinary, multi-organizational, multi-team systems work together within and across organizational cultures. And so we're working to see how we can leverage, and sort of in the direction that NSF has gone with the ERC program, really seeing how we need to work together with disciplines outside of engineering and natural sciences and computing to really solve societal problems in a cohesive, collaborative, and effective way. And I think the UN Sustainable Development Goals give us a wonderful basis to start framing a lot of that work in the education and research space. So I'd love to talk about that more. And then fine-tune our culture and climate so people from all backgrounds and identities can succeed. Because it does no good to get more diverse people into a university or into our workplaces if the climate and culture are not conducive to their success. And so recently, UT Dallas became a charter member of Sea Change, which is headed by the AAAS. And we are all working together to identify and eradicate barriers to equity, because we recognize we can't just focus on diversity. We have to get to the roots of the problems that have caused the lack of diversity, and that's where equity and justice come in. And so beyond that, one other missing piece that I think we need to consider is recognizing that disparities are often exacerbated for those of us with multiple intersectional, traditionally marginalized identities. For me, as a Black woman, and specifically as a Black disabled woman, my experience might look quite different from another woman from another group. And so how all of our different intersectional identities impact our trajectories. And the other thing that my team in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is really focused on with our newly redefined mission is going beyond. So where are we not typically showing up? These are the places that we are focusing on. So number one, making sure that what we're working on is research to practice. We're not researching for the sake of getting more NSF funds. We're researching because we want to take what we learn and apply it to what we do and how we can do better. And then we want to look at how this translates into how we teach as an institution and what we teach, so that we're cultivating the next generation of engineers and all other disciplines, quite frankly, to do a better job than we have in the past. So thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to the discussion.
David, you're muted, I think.
Dang it, it's 2 years in and I still do that. But thank you very much, everyone. We're very fortunate now to have Hayatun Salem, the CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering and Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation. And thank you for joining us at the end of your day. She chairs the government's Business Innovation Forum and the St. Andrews Prize for Environment, and co-chaired with Sir Lewis Hamilton his Commission on Black Representation in UK Motorsport. She's non-executive director at Lang O'Rourke and the Unboxed Festival, trustee of Mission 44, Engineering UK, and Foundation for Science and Technology, member of the Leveling Up Advisory Council, advisor to Equal Her and Lloyd's Register Foundation, and she's been named as one of the 10 most influential women in both UK engineering and UK tech. She has a PhD in biochemistry, was made CBE for services to international engineering in 2019. Ayeton, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I'm really delighted to be contributing to this important discussion, and I'm going to be focusing my remarks on a campaign that our academy, which is the UK sister academy to the NAE, has been running since the start of 2018, called This is Engineering. It's an inherently UK perspective, but hopefully some of this will resonate with my US colleagues as well. I do apologise, it's just a plane passing by. So unfortunately, we also have a very long-standing engineering skills shortfall and pernicious diversity deficit in the UK. And that was the backdrop to the creation of This is Engineering campaign. Next slide, please. Our skills and diversity challenges are not new. So along the lines of discussion we've been hearing today, we recognise that, so many organisations have been throwing resource at this issue for so many years that if we want to achieve a different outcome, we are going to have to do something different to get there. So next slide, please, Daryl, I think. Thank you. So what was different about This is Engineering? Well, first of all, although it was led by the Academy, it is led by the Academy, we explicitly designed it to be a partnership campaign. There's no Academy branding on it. And we started from the premise that if we can focus on the shared outcome that we're all trying to deliver and then work out how to collaborate to get there, we have a better chance of success. Secondly, we recognize that whilst we certainly could define the problem, we weren't the right people to define the solution to that problem in this particular case. So we've put ourselves in the hands of marketing experts, the people who promote brands and concepts to young people day in, day out. We've asked them to tell us what we should do to market the brand of engineering. And through that, This is Engineering was born, a digital marketing-led campaign. A few important points. We're engaging with young people on their terms in the places that they hang out. That's come through a little bit in today's discussion. We're working through media that young people consume and trust, and we're starting from their interests and then showing them how engineering can connect with those. The initial strapline was follow what you love into engineering, whether that's sport or fashion or gaming or sustainability, whatever floats your boat, there's an engineering role that can connect with that. And our marketing experts, who did a lot of quantum call research to support the development of the content for the campaign, led us to focus on showcasing real engineers who are doing inspiring but also relatable things for teenagers. And it was really quite depressing to find out just how young you had to be relatable to a teenager. Turns out it's not any of us on this call. We decided to run 2 waves or 2 seasons of the campaign each year to coincide with the points in the year when young people were most actively considering their career choices. And we made a conscious decision to reclaim the word engineering, it's come up again today, and to embrace the fact that it's an incredibly broad and diverse set of careers encompassed within engineering. We wanted to embrace that as a strength. So we have a similar set of discussions about the word engineer, whether it's being devalued in the UK, it's too associated with oily rags or the people who fix your elevators or whatever. And honestly, we thought, well, if the Royal Academy of Engineering isn't prepared to stand up for engineers, then we're in a bad place. But at the same time, next slide, please, we do have a perceptions challenge on our hands. And Yvette has done an amazing job of setting up this slide, so I'm not going to have to say too much about it. They do check out the suggestions that Google search engine was at this time offering as the rest of the sentence when you start with engineering is. So it's interesting to notice that Yvette has had exactly the same observation that we've had, both about the problem and also about the fact that there has been some progress. So we've been busy over the past 4 years in well, we've created an image library that comprises high quality, free to access photos of real engineers doing real engineering, which we have actively promoted to the media and engaged with the people whose images come up highest on the search engine image search, to encourage them to improve the imagery associated with engineering stories. And as you've all seen for yourself, we haven't cracked the issue of the lazy visual shorthand for an engineer being a person in a hard hat. We have made some progress in terms of the diversity of people among the images that appear. So next slide, please. I think it's time to try and show you a little bit more about the campaign itself. So here, you can see some of the static images of some of the engineering heroes that we feature. These young engineers, from a prosthetics technician in Alan's case to Daniela, a designer and entrepreneur who creates VR-based tools. And I'm going to give Daryl a great test here for his nerves and ask him to please try and get us into the video. And while he's doing that, I'm just going to say that one of the really important things about our campaign is that we decided to take a ruthlessly audience-led approach, which meant that all content was rigorously tested with our target audience of teenagers. And that created some really interesting discussions internally on where some very senior people had to be reminded that their views on content were most welcome, but not always relevant. So come on, Daryl, let's give this a go. Thank you so much, Daryl. Well done. If we can flick back to the slides, that would be great. Thank you. And so let me tell you a little bit about how impactful the campaign has been to date. So one of the great things about a digital campaign delivered through targeted advertising is you can actually get a lot of useful data about who you're reaching. And we use an independent market research company to survey the target market of UK teenagers before and after each wave of the campaign, so twice a year, to understand the impact the campaign is having. Next slide, please, Daryl. So since the launch at the start of 2018, our videos have been viewed over 55 million times by a pretty much gender balanced audience of UK teenagers. We see campaign awareness amongst that target group, so how many of them recognise that they've seen the campaign, at around 20 to 25%. It was 26% in the most recent survey. And the self-reported willingness to consider a career in engineering has gone up by up to 85%, with higher increases for teens from underrepresented groups. And we've also started monitoring parents more recently, and it's encouraging to see that amongst those who have seen our content, over 85% said they would recommend a career in engineering. Next slide, please. And that reference to parents is important because although we started off with this very tightly targeted campaign on young people, over time we realised, of course, that actually young people don't make decisions about their careers in isolation. So we realise it's incredibly important to engage with those who are influencing their career decisions. And in 2019, we established this as Engineering Day as an opportunity for partners right across engineering and allied parts of society to come together to show how engineers make possible so many aspects of modern life. In our first year, we engaged with over 100 organisations, from media outlets like the BBC to utilities companies to tech companies like Facebook, as it then was, all of whom pledged to increase the public visibility of more representative images of engineers. So that was linked to the launch of the image library. And since then, the pandemic has obviously made this hard to do in person. It's been primarily an online set of activities, but fingers crossed, we're looking forward to a more in-person engagement this year. First Wednesday in November every year, 2nd of November this year. And taking a quick look into the future, recognising that we've got very limited time, could I have the next slide, please? We're looking at how to build on some really good results, but knowing that the whole task ahead of us is still so significant. And as people have said throughout the day so far, scaling is massively important. One of the key ways to do that is to try and create more content in a co-creation mode. We've benefited a lot from using targeted advertising, but for this to keep extending reach and impact, we need to move more to organic content that's produced by other people independently and which they share voluntarily. We're looking forward to a new website and exploring new channels. We've had some early success with advertising on gaming platforms. And then finally, really importantly, I think we recognize that there is this opportunity to create a community, a movement that doesn't rely on us pushing the content out there to the same extent. I am absolutely convinced there's an army of people out there who feel passionately about engineering and the impact on all of our lives, and would be delighted to help spread the gospel. And we're also really keen to share our learning and learn from others so that we can all be more effective in the campaigns that we run, which is part of today's objectives, of course. So very quickly, final slide shows the goal we've set ourselves, which we're on track to achieve if we articulate it in terms of what young people are telling us. It's really important to say that a campaign like this is never in isolation going to shape people's career choices, but we believe and we hope that it can open people's minds to the fact that engineering is for everyone, and more young people from all parts of society can start to see a future in this amazing, creative, human-centric, diverse and future-shaping career. And I'll stop at that point. The last slide just has the links on so that you can find our image library and our videos. Thank you so much. Look forward to the question and discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayutan. I will say we were going to be joined by Tammy Johnson from Medtronic, who was going to talk about their campaign that's relevant to recruiting people into engineering. But I think Hayutan just showed us a case study, a perfect case study of how to structure a commercial persuasion campaign to reach young people. And while you are gathering your thoughts for questions, I will just point out one final thing. In our conversation this morning, I was paying attention to how many different audiences we discussed. We discussed kindergartners, and elementary school students, high school students, college students. We discussed their parents, their teachers. We discussed engineers. We discussed a whole range of society, tens and tens of millions of Americans. And what I think Hayutan just demonstrated is if you really want to have success and measure success and be able to deliver success, being very clear on who your target audience is and who influences them is a crucial step that we would need to consider. So with that, we'll open to questions from the group. And do we have?
I have a question.
Please.
Hi, Yvette. Thanks for the excellent presentation, and fellow Texan. What I want to ask you is, what are you doing to try to really expand how we contribute to National Engineering Week? It's, again, I mentioned earlier, even when I was in industry, it's a very important forum to reach young people. And simply put, people still use outdated videos and so on and so forth to try to make sense of what it is. So I would like your opinion on that. And thanks for the great presentation, by the way.
Thank you, and former colleague at UT Arlington, just across town there. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had to strike some comments just for the sense of time, and that was one of the things that I struck. So thank you for bringing it up so I get to talk about it. And we do have on the call Kathy Renzetti, I believe, is here, Executive Director of Discover E, and also Dr. Mike Smith, who's president of their board of directors. And Discover E is the organization that is responsible for Engineers Week nationally. I actually interviewed Kathy on a recent episode of my podcast. And so if you reach out there, you'll hear a bunch of things. But one of the things that came out, well, a couple of things that came out was, one is how they're making sure that their resources are definitely up to date. And also very engaging. So there was some pivoting that had to be done during the pandemic because everything went to remote learning environments and people weren't able to go into classrooms. And so they have videos there with young, and I appreciated your comments about reaching young people and who we are not as influencers as much as we want to be, but being able to have the young faces and voices there in videos, engaging with students in their classes and having the on-demand access to be able to hear from engineers who look like them and have several interests outside of engineering that's similar to theirs. So they'll see that engineers aren't these Well, I'm a self-professed nerd, but we aren't just nerds locked up in a closet with pocket protectors like Dilbert or something, but we are people who love music, who love the arts, and who do so many other things. So that's one thing. And the other thing is really keeping the resources up to date. So on that particular podcast episode, we talk about how you can engage if you want to work as a volunteer, to take engineering lessons into the classroom as a volunteer, as an engineer, how you can, if you have things that you've developed and you want to share them through their resources, Discover E is open to all of that. And then of course, through Discover E, they have the focus on engaging more young women in engineering. And so there are specific days and activities focused on that aspect of the work. And we talked also about engaging more students with disabilities. And we talked about specifically those of us who have disabilities. I was born with a disability. Some people become disabled later in life. But ultimately, we become problem solvers just to go through life every day. And so why not have that innate problem solving ability show up more in our engineering classrooms and our engineering workplaces? So removing barriers to the engagement of children and people with disabilities more broadly, it's all there. So I hate to point you to my podcast as a plug, but you'll get everything you just asked for in that episode with Catherine Zetti.
Thank you. I'll do that. Thank you.
All right.
Other questions or observations?
Hi, this is Kathy Renzetti. I have to thank Yvette for that. I think I need to pull you on our team, Yvette, because you described Discover Engineering so well. But I put our link in the chat, and I just do want to highlight, we are getting ready. We're actually doing research now on Messages Matter. So everything we were just talking about with what the Royal Academy just did, this is sort of our relooking at our research that we did in the early 2000s. That was sort of part of Change the Conversation and Engineer Your Life. And it's been, almost 20 years. So those teenagers are now in their 30s. So we're doing the same as well, and really looking at, how are we communicating to the teenagers of today and their parents. So this discussion is so exciting for me. So I am going to be reaching out to everybody on this panel because we all need to be working together as a coalition, and that's something that's huge for Discover E. So yeah, I'm super excited about the research and working with all of you on getting all these messages out. Thanks, Yvette.
Thank you, Kathy. And Catherine, do you want to add in?
Yeah, I just want to thank Hayotan, and hopefully I said your name at least close to right. I apologize for that. I want to thank you for participating, and I love the campaign. Is there a way for this team, in fact, to get access to some of the marketing insight that was shared? One of the points I made earlier was meet the students where they are, and that campaign definitely does that. I love it. So it'd be very interesting to see what the marketing team, how they pulled that together, and what insights we can learn from that.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, we're really happy to share that. In fact, my colleague Jo Trigg has just dropped in her email address, and we intended to, from the outset, create an open source campaign, because it is a bit depressing, really, when you look at the amount of money and time people have put into trying to crack this shared problem, and all doing it in our silos with our little labels on it. And ultimately, we need to drive up the quality and the impact of these collective efforts if we're actually going to create the change we all want in the world. So we have a very clear kind of, culture almost of, we want to share our learning and make this as easy as possible for other people to steal and adopt and learn from, and to also feedback in terms of how we can do better. So yeah, absolutely. And I also would just say one thing I didn't have time to mention when I was presenting, was that I think another really important aspect of what we learned from this campaign is that when you talk about being audience led, and David, you drew out some of the kind of different demographics within that audience, actually to remember that even within the demographic of teenagers or teenagers of specific ethnicity or gender, there is massive diversity. And we were very clear that we didn't want to have a campaign where we just got one really successful message and then just amplified that as much as possible. We wanted to show images and stories of engineering that appeal to different people. We all will have come into this world through our different routes. And the only way we're going to create true inclusion in engineering is if people who are motivated by different things, excited by different things, all see this as a place where they are welcome, where they can contribute, where they can help change the world. So, you know, and even that change the world bit, not everyone is going to be, you know, not everyone's going to find that's a hook that draws them into engineering. So I think that nuance around different content appealing to different people is really, really vital. And so we've been very meticulous in making sure that we use people with different accents, people who come from different demographic groups, people whose day-to-day jobs will be massively different, and trying to just keep on getting that sense of the breadth of the world of the universe of engineering, really. So yeah, always happy to share. Thank you.
Excellent.
We've got time for one more question. David, why don't you take us out of this conversation?
Yes, I'm curious with all of the panelists, excellent presentations, and those flicks are phenomenal. My grandsons will be exposed to those very quickly. But what is your definition of an engineer? My background is structural engineering, and I ran a business for a while before I retired. And I hired PhD engineers that did not prove to be the most effective designers, and I hired people without degrees that proved to be phenomenal designers. You know, in America, my thought is that, you know, one or two tweets from Elon Musk would do more to promote engineering if he just said he was an engineer than all the studies we could muster. So, you know, as you look, especially, you know, when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, how do you define the environment of engineering for people that you're trying to recruit? I guess just one at a time. Bill, maybe you could start.
Well, I note Elon Musk was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2022.
Yes, he was.
So
I've never heard him describe himself as an engineer.
there was a large Reddit thread you can follow on whether he's an engineer or not. And
okay,
I mean, my answer is very simple: it's someone who solves problems using heuristic method, which would capture both of your non-PhD and PhD engineers. So the main activity to me is design.
Mm-hmm. Yvette?
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I don't think it necessarily follows those disciplinary boundaries. And I know that was a lot of the conversations when we were talking about the need to design with and not just for communities. You have communities that are facing challenges every day, whether it's with access to proper sewer treatment or water access right here in the United States, that are engineering to solve problems every day and don't have a degree at all. And so I think it just depends on the context. You know, certain groups that you're in are going to say engineers are defined by having a professional license in engineering. Some people are going to define it by having the degrees, but I go to what Bill says. It's people that are working together through this intentional, iterative process to solve problems. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. If we're doing that well, we're doing it in a very inclusive way, in a very equitable way that brings together the voices in a very user-centered approach, from the problematization, but all the way through the solution. And in with a universal design framing, so that we're trying to think of the broadest stakeholders possible. Now, we're still trying to move the needle to get people to think about that more, but overall, that's my sense of engineering.
I'm also curious as to, you know, in the UK, how broad the definition of engineering is. As Yvette mentioned, here, certainly in my disciplines of civil engineering or structural engineering, a license is part of the definition of engineering from a statutory standpoint, but not necessarily from a creative standpoint. What is it like in Great Britain?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some similarities definitely. And so you have parts of the profession where what we'd call chartered engineer status is either essential or expected. But large parts of the profession, particularly the new areas, I mean, in bioengineering, software engineering, you would not expect to be a chartered engineer unless you maybe in an academic context more so, but not if you're a practicing engineer or you're out there in industry. So it's quite a fraught debate. There's a lot that comes with the idea of professionalism and commitment to the professional standards that come with being a registered engineer. But actually, when we're thinking about young people as a potential audience, it's very important to let that sort of sit as a backdrop rather than the foreground, because what we want to do is to show that there are all sorts of ways in which you can be an engineer in the context of your own career development. And really, it is about that, using the fruits of knowledge that come out of science and technology to solve problems that impact on people's lives. That is what it is at its heart. And we are really storytelling in a campaign like This Is Engineering. What we have to make sure is that once people sort of intrigued or interested or motivated to find out more, it's easy for them to then understand the pathways. And for us, it's a big challenge that in the UK, you typically have to choose which discipline of engineering you want to pursue at the point at which you decide to go to university or to college. That's quite an extra hurdle compared to, in our case, medicine, where you could start doing medicine and then specialize later. But yeah, I mean, I think we have an inclusive definition of engineering. This is one area where we do use senior engineers to make an assessment of whether what we're showcasing really is engineering or not. Don't want to devalue the campaign and just try and appeal to everybody without keeping your integrity. So we do use a process of assessment as to whether the potential young people we feature do count as engineers. Not all of them have first degrees in engineering, the majority do.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we'll close out this session. I do want to thank Bill and Yvette and all the questioners, including Andrew, who unfortunately we weren't able to get to his question before the end of this session. But one thing that it will stick with me is, despite all those white hard hats we've just seen in the Google search, the word that everybody here has been using consistently over this day is people. And the people kind of get lost under all those white hard hats. And so how do we make sure that the people get primacy in the work that we do? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will return at 1:20 Eastern time. And at that point, there will be another brief, what will there be? There will be a panel on prior messaging efforts. And so see you after the break.
Okay, thank you, Leah. So welcome everyone to panel 2, prior messaging efforts. I'm Teresa Walker. I'm the communications director of the School of Engineering Education at Purdue University. And I currently serve as the chair of the ASEE Engineering Communicators Division. We are actually just starting our second book discussion on this very topic in this report, and I have several of those actually on this Zoom today. So we're very excited to have them with us to hear more. Please remember, before we get started, to mute yourself as we prepare to dive into this panel discussion. Note that we'll hear from our panelists first, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards. So if you do have questions or comments, we absolutely encourage you to add those to the chat as you've already been doing, and then we'll address those at the end. Moshe Kam. Dr. Kam is the electrical engineer and engineering educator, currently serving as our dean of Newark College of Engineering at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Again, I encourage you to use the link in the chat to see his full bio. So thank you, Moshe, for joining us.
Very good. Do you see my slide?
Yes.
Excellent. So appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. As was indicated, I'm talking to you from Newark, and we'll discuss Newark in a few minutes. Again, I'd like to discuss some of the websites that have been in portals that have been created over the years, specifically tryengineering.org by IEEE and accreditation.org. Say something about messaging in the time of crisis. Say a word about student projects in the community and their impact on understanding of the public of engineering, and say a word about the maker movement and the public. So let's start with Try Engineering, which I'm showing you how it looks today, with resources for teachers, resources for students, and not less importantly, resources for volunteers in STEM outreach. And work on this portal started in 2005 with support from IBM and the New York Hall of Science. And the intent was to provide a source of information, an engaging source of information, focusing on engineering as a career path, and to touch future students, touch their parents, the teachers, and the school counselors. Among the resources that you could find then and you can find today are lesson plans. And these lesson plans were created such that they are self-contained, such that they are inexpensive. When we started, I think that we told ourselves no more than $150 for 30 students for 3 weeks. It's probably a little bit more expensive now. Flexible in terms of the time, you could use them for 2 hours, you can use them for 2 weeks. And in many locales, we have tied them to educational standards in order to make them more palatable. In some cases, even this was necessary for teachers to be able to adopt them. And one of the parameters was that you did not need to be an engineer, you did not need to be necessarily a person with a STEM degree as a teacher in order to understand and use some of these lesson plans. We provide a large number of other resources for teachers and students, a guide to the world of robots. Some individuals feel that the history of technology and engineering is a good tool in making technology and engineering popular. So there is an avenue like that. And an e-learning resources site was very popular and continues to be popular because of the pandemic. We also provide live virtual series, and here are examples of some of the lesson plans: 3D printing by hand, a century of plastics, a question of balance that has to do with manufacturing. There are scores of those, and they all have guides for the teacher, guides for the student. Every Tuesday, our vlog provide a new topic, and you can see some of the more recent one: cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, 5G, and we actually take requests. We answer questions that students ask about majors in engineering. And many of the questions that we answer here and in other parts of the site were collected from students, for example, in open houses in different universities. And I also wanted to indicate that the design of the whole thing was done with focus groups of very, very young people, which usually IEEE did not engage. It was the first time we have done something like that. So we are answering here questions such as, what's the difference between computer engineering and computer science, which is the perennial question that we get in open houses, and questions of this nature, and provide an opportunity to go deeper. There are several other activities, such as a summer institute of 2 weeks on-campus engineering summer camp for high school students. At the beginning, we had an Ask an Expert in real time, and we fell under the weight of it. We got so many questions that were so complex that at the end, we just tried to distill, try to find what we were asked most commonly and provide answers, and we continue to update it based on what our customers, the students and the parents, are asking us. And we have games. This is one of the areas where I don't think that we would have designed it as we not ask young people what they want. And they told us that they want the engineering themed games. We found over the years that there is a population, mostly of students, that starts with the games. That's the first thing that they do. And then they start exploring the other parts of what we have to offer. And as I said, some other activities, a STEM summit for our volunteers, and an experiment that we are doing now with students and teachers in grades 3 to 5. Another site that was originally managed by IEEE, but managed now by us, by NJIT, is accreditation.org. We relaunch it. And this is a one-stop shop for information related to accreditation of academic programs. You'll be surprised how many questions you get, especially from parents in open houses, as to what is accreditation, what does it mean, are you accredited, are all your programs accredited, etc. So we provided this resource. This is how it used to look. If you looked at it years ago, it has a much neater and more contemporary way to look now. And one of the most important things that it provides is a search engine, which allows you to find the program. If you're interested in mechanical engineering, if you want to do it in a rural environment, if you want to do it in a certain state or in a certain country, this is worldwide, we will tell you where these programs are, who accredits them, because this is just for accredited program, not necessarily by ABET, but by other organizations when it is out of the United States, but mostly by ABET in the United States. And we'll send you to the website of the school once we describe it for you and you decided to go further. I wanted to say a few things about other matters. You are, I'm sure, all familiar with that, and that is the ASCE annual infrastructure report and the score. And this is actually, in terms of engaging the public, this is actually a pretty popular and successful attempt in the sense that it gets into the evening news, it is spoken about, it is used, and in some cases, the people are even digging deeper. In general, I think that we don't have we have an opportunity in many cases when there is a crisis not to miss the opportunity to use it in order to speak to the public. And this is the example of the condominium collapse in Surfside, Florida in June last year. And it was an opportunity for many structural engineers and others to explain to the public what happened, to explain to the public what does it mean to you, and what do you need to do in case you are concerned about something like that happening in your neighborhood. For us in Newark, the opportunity had to do with a large program to replace lead pipes. And this was an opportunity for us to provide an educational means both to the general population and also to Newark high schools. And it has done for I think, environmental engineering what many years of rhetoric have not done. I mean, we have been able to get through to large populations about this particular variant of engineering. Many of you are familiar with this program, EPICS, which started in Purdue and continues to be led by Purdue, and Leah Jamison was one of the major founders. This is a program of service learning design. This is a service learning design program in which teams of students partner with local and global community organizations. It is successful in Purdue. It was also adopted by IEEE as EPICS in IEEE. These are one project at a time. These are students who do work in the community. Here is an example of a project in New Hampshire about restoration of oyster beds. Here is an example of a project in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio about monitoring air quality near shale drilling sites. But they integrate. We find that over time, we started getting feedback about what they have done in terms of the relation between academia and the community. The last thing I wanted to say, to stay within my 10 minutes, is that so many of us has built makerspaces. This is the makerspace at NYU. Just a picture from there, a picture from the one at Yale, one of the biggest one in the country, Yale Center for Engineering, Innovation, and Design. This is a picture from our makerspace at NJIT. They provide us with an opportunity to improve our connections to the community. The simplest thing is to bring high school students there for a tour, but the more important thing is to bring them there for activities and show them engineering and engineering design with their hands. There is a possibility of increasing access to the community by short courses on equipment training for cooperating organizations. And in many states, there are now apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs. And this is the ideal place to do them and create a bond to a community that we usually do not serve, but this is our opportunity. And with this, I'll stop and even return you 10 seconds so that we can continue our discussion a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kong. So last but certainly not least is our third speaker, Pat Natal. He's the current director or the executive director of the United Engineering Foundation. And he's really the last piece of this puzzle with us. He's going to address his experience through professional societies. And again, Pat's full bio can be found in the link in the chat. So it's all yours, Pat.
Thank you. I appreciate the time to talk about this topic, which is very important to me. It goes back to my early days of entering the profession. I am a first-generation engineering student, first-generation college graduate from my family. I grew up in the city of Newark. I was confused when I was there. Why were there so few women and people of color in my class? And that challenged me from the beginning. And why can't it be more appropriate? Why can't we engage more? So this whole topic has been resonating with me through my life. Moshe mentioned the report card. It's interesting, in the early days of presenting the report card, we had some real challenges. I was the executive director of the American Society of Civil Engineers for 12 years, and we didn't get a lot of attention early on. It took years and years of work, but staying on message was key. So that is important going forward. One of the earlier speakers today talked about the whole issue of people. And it's not about the things we do. And that's something that always resonated with me. In fact, I remember when I arrived at ASCE as the executive director, I went into our publications department and said, why does our magazine have things on the cover and not people? Engineering is people serving people. And we miss the ball too frequently on that. Too often we talk about the things and not the outcomes, the people that we serve. There's been several efforts through the National Academy. I reflect back in 2001, we had a convocation. The AAES and NAE did a convocation every year to bring engineering societies together to talk about critical issues. In 2001, the leadership of the National Society of Professional Engineers was challenging the public understanding or lack thereof. And in the audience of that session was one of the NA members, Stephen Bechtel, a active member of ASCE and many other organizations. And he was so impressed with the message, he put together he funded the initial study of raising the public awareness of engineering in 2002. I worked on one of the subcommittees for that, and we identified the problem. And one of the key issues, we always talked about engineering in the terms of, are you good in math and science? Not about the outcomes, about what we do. Well, it was great. We came up with the identified problem, but nothing happened. And I remember visiting Stephen Bechtel out in California a number of times, and he said, why aren't we doing anything? There's nothing happened. Well, in 2007, a committee was put together to produce the, it was called the Public Understanding of Engineering Messages. And with that, the thing was really interesting. Well, Jackie was on the committee, Leah was on the committee, Don Giddens chaired that committee, but what we had on that committee was a little different. We had, in addition to engineers, we had communication specialists and marketing specialists. They looked at the issues a little differently than the engineer did, and they questioned some of our messages and what we were doing. The other thing was unique, we did message testing. What resonated with a young Hispanic female? What resonated with a young Black male? And the audience, what a novel thought, understand your audience. Talk to the audience you're trying to address. And that was some of the key outcomes of that initiative. Unfortunately, I bring up this book, and I put a picture of the book on this slide. I mention this frequently to people, and people are still ordering. I'm saying you ought to read it. It's still relevant. The information there is relevant, but we keep going back to the same thing. Each society wants to do its own thing. Each society wants to have its own message, which is nice, but we don't have a common message going forward. I represent the United Engineering Foundation. I served on their board for a number of years, and when I retired from ASCE, the executive director of the United Engineering Foundation retired, and I took over the UEF as executive director. Our mission and vision are pretty straightforward, right on the screen, about the advancing the science of and the arts and sciences of engineering, about serving people, and it's about providing grants. A beautiful part of this organization, we do not raise money. We invest a portfolio and we give it away. IRS requires we give it away. Our members are the Chemical Engineering, Institute of Chemical Engineers, AIME, ASCE, ASME, and IEEE. And we basically are looking for interdisciplinary, and I emphasize that in this slide because it's about working together. And frankly, if we have something that comes in, it's all civil or electrical, it doesn't get very far. It's got to be cross-disciplinary. It's got to be engaging. There's got to be outreach. And our focus is diversity, K through 12. In fact, I remember we did some funding of some programs K through 12, and we started using it for preschool. And I even got Stephen Bechtel talking about the importance of preschool when we were doing some of those funding. And it's about making the profession more professional with ethics, safety, security, and leadership. Here are some of the initiatives that the UEF has funded over the years. A couple of years ago, the American Society of Civil Engineers put together Dream Big, Engineering Our World, a 3D IMAX movie on engineering. It was interesting. I was at ASCE when the producer came to me and he said, we're going to do a movie about civil engineering. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to do about engineering. And then I went to our board of direction and said, you're going to put $1 million up front to fund this initiative, and it's not about civil engineering. I thought they were going to throw me out, but we got it started and we produced it. It was, we had it on IMAX theaters. We had it on Netflix. We funded the 50K Coalition, and the 50K Coalition was important because it was, how do we engage a diverse community? How do we get more people of color and more women into the profession? And the National Society of Black Engineers, with Carl Reed leading that charge, put together a coalition with the goal of producing 50,000 non-traditional engineers annually by 2025. There's another organization that spun off of that now that is looking at creating 100,000. We can do it, and that'll help make the change. Kathy mentioned earlier about messages matter. Well, this year, 2022, UEF is funding a grant to support that effort from Discover E. I won't comment on the ethics. I think Moshe did a wonderful job covering that. And that's another great program that is interdisciplinary. A couple of others that were there. We had what's in your backyard? How do you talk to people about something simple? Make it simple. Engineers Without Borders did a project that was funded by UEF. WGBH out of Boston is a great outreach organization. They have done Design Squad US and Design Squad globally. Last one I'll mention is Next MacGyver. UEF funded that initiative from the National Academy of Engineering. This study was about a woman as MacGyver. When Hollywood got it, they produced another male lead. A couple of thoughts. These things we've been undertaking for years, and somebody mentioned earlier, limited results. I agree with that. Our results have been limited. We have one-off attempts by societies, corporations, and individuals. Nice, it's not making it happen. We've had some engagement of the major engineering societies on a collaborative effort that kind of spun off of an ASME initiative a couple of years ago, or last year, excuse me. And it didn't go very far, but we've been meeting with major engineering society leadership to talk about what can we do collaboratively, again, collaboratively. My question to the group is, we need an organization to take the lead. AAES doesn't exist any longer. Is it NAE? Is it NS, the National Society of Engineering Educators? Is it Engineering Change Lab, a group we heard from earlier? Who is it? How can we make a difference? We need to band together with a common message and drive this forward. Thank you.
Well, Pat, thank you very much for that. I think we're gonna open it up to Q&A. I noticed there aren't any questions in the chat so far, but you're welcome to use the functionality to raise your hand. And then just make sure to unmute yourself and then introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation. Any questions?
May I ask a question of Pat then? So we keep mentioning the fact that we are unable to get together, but UEF actually was able to get us together with Engineering and Technology History Wiki. So can you speak a little bit about that and what made it different? And can this be a blueprint in terms of the effort that we are describing here?
Moshe, great question, great comment. It is a blueprint, but how do we get more engaged in that? It just, primarily it's the 5 major societies of the UEF that are combined for that kind of effort. We need to engage. Well, ASME used to have a program called the Public Policy Symposium in DC every year, and it was tied into the convocation. So and we brought a whole bunch of people together, and they used to have like 60 organizations. I know Dave Supcup is on the call. We had like 60 organizations get together and hear common messages about what was happening on the Hill. So I just think we need to work collaboratively to expand that beyond just us.
Okay, we do have a couple of hands raised, so we'll start with Howie and then Kathy.
Hi, thank you so much for the interesting comments. Two questions. One's a little more straightforward, one not so much. The straightforward one is I was interested why AES went away, and then the less straightforward one is I don't quite remember who showed it, but there was one of the examples of try engineering and stuff and plastics and all the great things that engineers have done for plastics. Plastics don't have such a good reputation necessarily anymore. And so it takes me back to the very first talk about how I think it was 49% of the people have a negative view of engineering. So that's a harder one, but I was just curious what people thought about, how do you balance what we think maybe are good things with maybe perceptions or changing views. But the first one was simple, just what happened to AES.
I'll try to do a quick response to your question about why AAES went away. And I'll give you my perspective. Others may want to jump in. AAS, the funding model just never was clearly worked out. It was cost of overhead was burying the organization, and we weren't getting continued membership engagement. So in fact, at one point, ASCE picked up the secretariat of it, and we continued to operate it at a loss. And I knew that when I picked it up, but I felt it was needed for the overall profession. When we tried to balance it out, it just didn't work. So the funding model was the challenge there.
Let me answer the question about plastics. I mean, the idea is to show teachers and students the good, the bad, and the ugly. The class about plastics is an opportunity to discuss the very issue that you mentioned, the fact that there is an issue of pollution, the fact that we find plastics everywhere, the fact that we recently even found plastic in the bloodstream of some. Yeah, we are supposed to cover that. So the fact that the topic is, the idea of Try Engineering was not to present some kind of an idealistic, rosy picture, but actually to demonstrate also the difficulties, the equivocation, the ethical problems, and that's part of it. It's part of the lesson plans.
Unless otherwise said, I think we can wrap up and we will get us going to the next session, which is the breakout discussion. So thank you everyone for participating.
So I'm gonna take over now. At least I hope I can just take over from Teresa. So thank you everybody who has stayed for the breakout session. I'm Andrea Armani, Professor of Chemical Engineering and Material Science and Vice Dean of Engineering at the University of Southern California. So far in today's event, leaders in education, communication, and academic administration have really been driving our discussion. But now we're going to have, I hope, a 15-minute breakout session, which will give an opportunity for everybody who's still here to contribute ideas focused around the question that will be shortly posted in the chat by the wonderful NAE staff. And in a minute, everybody will be asked to join a breakout room. Once you're there, open a Google Slide document and go to the slide with your group number on it. Please select a group member to serve as your team's recorder and reporter. You'll receive a 5-minute warning before being brought back here for our group discussion. And your slide will be shown during the reporting time. So most importantly, have fun, have a good discussion. And I look forward to seeing everybody back here in 15 minutes or so. Bye. So I'm going to wait about 20 more seconds, but I see that my team is back, and my team is the first group, and Howie is going to be our reporter. Oh, no, Jennifer is our reporter. Howie was our reporter. I really hope that Jennifer remembers that she's our reporter and that she's okay with this.
I thought I was our reporter.
Yeah, I was recording.
Okay, great.
I agree
Howie's
to
our
be the
reporter.
reporter. Jennifer was helping facilitate our
Perfect.
discussion.
As you can tell, we really organized this.
Right.
Okay, so Howie, you're up.
Okay.
You have 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay, and you want me to address the 2 questions, I assume?
Both questions.
So, okay. So thanks. We had a great discussion. We had Jennifer, Andrea, Simil, and Lance in our group. And in terms of things that would reflect a good effort, one of the things I'll start with that we talked about near the end was actually finding gateway topics. So the space being, for example, being a gateway for middle school kids. And we pretty much agreed that it was an apolitical topic. So, kids get interested in space and you can go from there to sort of build on the engineering. So finding other things like that. And it's very accessible. Everybody sees the moon. Not sure everybody gets to see the stars, but probably everybody sees the moon. We also talked about trying to unpack the overall data to understand where we are. So the data we saw at the very start from Leah about the decreased interest in engineering or awareness of engineering, but there's data that shows K to 12, it's actually going up. There's more people interested in majoring in that and stuff. And so you probably need to drill down a layer more to unpack that. Clearly need to focus on underrepresented groups. And part of that would be having good role models. So finding ways to explain to people the engineering behind everyday life. We talked about imagining a day without engineers, and that led us to dinosaurs as a gateway. So we'd all be back in the prehistoric time, supposedly. And then the last thing I'll mention was in terms of the denominator, there's 4 million kids born every year. And so I think we need to keep that in mind when we think about how many clicks we get on websites and how many people we get engaged in things and how we can scale things to the millions and tens of millions of kids, not just the handful. So
Fabulous. You're perfectly on schedule. So I'm going to hand it over to group 2. I'm not sure who the reporter is.
That's me, Alan Caesar. I'm a communicator and professional here at Purdue School of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And our group talked about capturing a talent and retaining talent would be one part of a PUE effort that would be important. There was talk about losing engineers that go into industry and then go into a different workforce. Making engineering in practice more public-facing conversations. Engineers are not generally visible. Of course, there's the trope or the belief that engineers are train conductors and that's it. But promoting an engineer's problem-solving mindset in any and every industry. So this is related to the first point, retaining talent. It's maybe not necessarily all bad that engineers go into other businesses as long as that mindset is there. Promoting that problem-solving mindset is important. The point is similar. Helping the public understand and appreciate what an engineer does, bringing the word engineering into common language, and using all the tools of communication that we have. So the measurable outcomes are directly related to these. We're talking about, one person mentioned, we don't. They might not personally use Twitter, but as organizations, we need to. And they're sort of standard PR measurements are things like whether there are social media measurements, whether they're been picked up in news outlets, common news outlets. Having engineering organizations with marketing departments. Obviously, I'm a product of that, but very clearly.
Alan, you got muted by accident.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if my time was up. Is that hard?
You have 10 seconds.
Okay. Students becoming engineers, diverse student bodies. These are all measurable outcomes that I think we would all be very proud of, as well as someone called out specifically the president of NAS on using the term engineer.
Perfect. So group 3. Is there anyone from group 3? Was group 3 one person? If there's no one from group 3, then we'll just skip to group 4.
I think group 3 was small and got folded into a couple of other groups.
Great. Group 4.
All right, I'm going to attempt this. And if someone else wants to chime in, please do, because we were very confused about what our task was. So I very quickly jotted down some notes. So one suggestion was a federated approach that we have so many. Engineering as a profession has always had, but especially now has lots of different folks doing lots of different work. And there's really a need to coordinate and, but maybe also provide for leeway in terms of areas of focus and communities that we reach. The second thing, Discover E is currently embarked in some deeper dive studies, updating research now. So I think it's important to see kind of what they come up with and where that's going. And I think it would probably, it sounded from what they were doing like it would be good to leverage that. Teachers make an excellent vehicle for very broad reach. So there was a call for us to make sure that whatever we do, we are leveraging that. There was also a concern about that we haven't yet talked about the sort of public anti-science sentiment, which seems to have been on the rise in recent years, and how that affects this conversation around engineering, because the landscape has shifted and we're not sure what that means. And then lastly, there was some discussion of kind of, are we in an echo chamber here as the NAE? Who are we involving in this conversation? And there are publics who have been burned by engineering, and how do they have a say in this process? It's a question. And then outcomes we didn't really talk about. Although related to that last one, you might say, what are the accountability mechanisms of the profession? So that's a question mark, but there may be other other measurable outcomes, but we didn't focus on that.
Great. I especially like the public has been burned by engineering, and who hasn't, who isn't at the table. Okay, group 5.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Smith. I am president of the board of directors actually for Discovery, and I also work with the peer group consulting in STEM diversity training and evaluation. Our group kind of covered several of the bases, some that have been discussed. We talk about successfulness PUE programs. We talked about the need to define engineering as a term, to broadly really define what it means today for engineering as we promote it to the public. Ensuring that NAE members use the term engineering more broadly in the foreground in how we promote our conversations around engineering and what we do. Imagery needs to match the definition of what engineering truly is. And we saw examples of that throughout today's conversation, that the imagery that youth and parents see often will define what engineering is without doing any further kind of research into what engineering is really about. We need to tailor our messaging to the audiences, the broader ecosystem of parents, volunteers, teachers, students. We need to tailor our message to those specific audiences and meet them where they are. And these messages need to be aspirational. You know, there's a negative connotation that sometimes comes with engineering and what engineers do and how we solve problems and what that means for the broader community and not just specific communities. So our messaging around what engineers can really do has to be aspirational. I talked about meeting the public where they are, which means connecting engineering to everyday life and processes based on environments and communities, and connecting them to social good. Many communities and many youth, especially given today's environment, connect to engineering through a social and human good lens. What can I do to really make everyone's life better? And so connecting the dots on that is important. Role modeling, of course, you can be what you see. So ensuring that there's a diversity of role models, and we have to engage and include, of course, our K-12 teachers, not just in providing resources, but being in the classrooms, really being a part of their training and their understanding of what engineering is, so they can then be ahead of the game when they're really trying to teach our youth. We talked about measures. We talked about reviewing of text and written and oral documents. Like, it's not just, you know, we have to really look at the full list of resources that are out there. And we make these types of changes, we have to make them in all areas, including written and oral text on the web, all those things. We talked about is our applications to engineering programs a true measure of success for a PUE program? And that may be one measurement, but it probably isn't the highest measurement. We have to talk about diversifying the field, and we talked about non-traditional paths as measurements as well. That every person that has an engineering mentality and doing engineering work is not necessarily going to end up with an engineering degree, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to function through the process of engineering design in their daily lives and the work they do. And it has to be more than engineering and technology literacy. That is the measure as well. And then we talked about outcomes, of course. Do we have enough people in the pipeline into engineering industry? Some would argue that we do, and that's discipline-based as well. We talked about the fact that some disciplines like bioengineering in some institutions actually don't need more students, whereas there are other disciplines that may. And do we have the right fields listed, as we talked about earlier, not just the founder disciplines of engineering, but there's a broader list of engineering disciplines that individuals can engage in, and are we really measuring and including those as well?
Great, thank you. So group 6.
All right, this is Jenna Carpenter. So I got appointed our spokesperson. So we talked about a lot of things as far as a successful effort. We talked about the importance of simple messages. If you're going to try to get this broadly, things like engineering is design, engineering makes the world a better place, some of the things we've talked about today. The importance of broadening the engineering community itself. If you want to get a message out there, then you need a broad spectrum of people, not only to be involved, but then to reflect kind of what you're talking about. Broadening the understanding of engineering careers, that's related at least to some degree in broadening community, because if people see engineering very narrowly, then they are not as likely to identify with it as they will if they realize the huge breadth of things you could do. We also talked some about the importance of making sure that engineering technology was included as part of that conversation. talked about the fact that it was important because it's such a huge problem that it is important to try to engage the global community, societies, accreditation, ABET, et cetera, in trying to present this unified message if we want to get that across. And then again, a common understanding, things like engineering as design, measurable outcomes. We said, you know, if you can see how engineering is reflected in society and you begin to see the things that you're trying to communicate reflected, then that's probably a pretty good idea that you're successful. So social media, communications, the news, movies, TV, how does that portray engineering? How are engineers and engineering portrayed by society at large? Sort of people on the street. Think of the draw scientist thing, the study that's been around for a long time, right? So what kinds of ways can you look at measuring how people describe engineers and engineering?
Great. So I think that was it. I'm looking for a confirmation. Yes, awesome. That was it. So thank you everybody for wonderful insights. I'm going to hand it back over to Leah to wrap us up and close us out for today.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. And wrapping up today, thank you, everyone. Thank the panelists, the speakers, our keynote speaker, and thank everyone who is asking questions, posting comments, participating in the breakout. Because this is and the goal is to be as broad, think as broadly as about this as we can. And so just a preview of tomorrow. We will resume tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and the session will run for 3 hours until 2 p.m. Eastern time. And the theme for tomorrow is about opportunities. Where, based on what we heard today and things we didn't hear today, what is the opportunity space? What is the case for increasing the public understanding of engineering? And I think we heard a lot about that today. And so can we start to turn that into something that ultimately is actionable? Making the case, the question about why, and also very specifically the question about why now. Is this, are there factors about what is happening in the world now, in technology now, how things have changed since? For example, the 2008 Changing the Conversation report that would say the time, in fact, is right because we have new capabilities, or, and both. Are there challenges that make it all the more imperative that we be making progress on increasing the public understanding and the public awareness of engineering? We'll have a breakout session and a all hands discussion towards the end of the session. That this is, I think of this as a 3-day story. And today was very much about hearing some of the backstory, the background, what has been done, how are people thinking, and what are people doing now? And we're starting to make a shift tomorrow to say, okay, so why now? What can we do about that? Can we start to converge in some ways about key ways of thinking about this, key things that would translate from conversation to action, and ultimately working towards day 3, where the day is focused on what are the strategic leverage points, what are the most promising next steps, and what happens after this. And so with that as backdrop, I would just say, think about what you heard today and what's resonating and what is missing. And we will be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And I look forward to seeing you. Thank you all for being here.